Hi everyone, my name's Jordan and welcome back to my channel. Today I've curated a list of 10 books that I think will be fun to read for the month of June, which is Pride Month. This month is incredibly important. It is not all rainbows. It is a month that celebrates the perseverance and the struggles and everything that queer people have had to go through in the past and today. There is a lot of things to educate ourselves on during this month, especially for allies. So please, I encourage you to look into materials that will teach you more about the history of this month and more about what you can do today to help these communities. I recommend you donate money to mutual aid funds that support the LGBTQ community. It is very important this month to educate ourselves. This list is going to all be fiction. It is all books that I have loved in the past few years that have queer characters as the focus. There is mostly fantasy, but there's also some romance on this list. And yeah, let's get into it. The first book I have is Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. This is a YA fantasy book. It's kind of like an urban fantasy, paranormal fantasy kind of thing. This book follows a traditional Mexican family that has a trans son, and they're having a hard time accepting his identity. And the men in this family have the ability to raise ghosts, and the whole community is tasked with ferrying the dead into the afterlife. And men and women have very different roles in this whole ritual, but the men perform the ritual, and so this young boy is set on proving to his family that he deserves to be called a brujo. So he tries to do a ritual himself, and he accidentally summons this teen boy that he went to school with. This young man is determined to find out what happened to him. He doesn't know how he died, and he wants to tie up some loose ends before being sent back. So these two boys work together to try to find out what happened, and also to try to prove to this boy's family that he deserves to be a brujo. And this story is just so heartwarming. It's so beautiful. It's a really good read for this month, but also worth rereading in October. It's very spooky vibes, got ghosts and stuff. I really loved this book. I think that the journey that his family goes through is very beautiful to see, but also the journey he goes through in accepting himself and kind of getting his first crush for the first time, even if it is on a ghost. But I think that the whole story overall is just very touching, and it's a very important story. It's very important for people this age especially to read this book, just so that they can feel like they're being accepted and that other people have experienced these things. I really just loved this story. It was so cute, so touching. I will probably reread it this year in October because it is just a perfect spooky season read, and it's got great representation. Aiden Thomas is a great author. I've also read Lost in the Neverwoods by them, and also a very cute Peter Pan retelling. So I definitely recommend Cemetery Boys. Next, I have a book that I've talked about a lot recently, and that's Gideon the Ninth by Tam Zamir. This is about gay necromancers in space. So that's it. That's all you need to know. I absolutely love this book now. I've just finished Harrow the Ninth recently, and it is a masterpiece. It is so incredible. I absolutely adore it. I've talked about it before, but the first time I read Gideon the Ninth, I listened to it as an audiobook and was so lost, didn't understand what was going on, and didn't really enjoy it because of it. So I reread it with my best friend Stephanie, and I read a physical copy and really enjoyed it. I thought it was so good the second time around. So I recently read Harrow the Ninth, and it is a masterpiece. Again, you have really no idea what's going on for the first 70% of the book, and I didn't care because the writing is just so good. I still loved the characters, and it's mostly based from Harrow's point of view, and Harrow doesn't know what's going on. So we're filling in the blanks while she's filling in the blanks. So it's so good. I absolutely loved this series. And the main relationship in it is a lesbian necromancer and her mercenary, or her bodyguard basically. So it is so touching, so funny. The banter is hysterical. It's just such a good book, and it is so well written. The writing is superb, and it just gets me in my feels, but also is so funny. I laugh out loud. I gasp They're just so good. I'm probably going to reread them very soon and just like gush some more because I am obsessed. Next, I have a very, very popular book. This is not like a lesser known book by any means, but it's Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This is a romance novel about the first son of the United States and one of the princes of England. And it's an enemies to lovers story. They have this like vendetta against each other, but then when there's a PR mishap, they must pretend to be best friends, but then they actually become best friends, and then romance ensues. It's steamy, it's adorable. Again, the banter is hysterical, it gets me laughing every time. I cried at the end the first time I read it, like full on sobbed. So I really enjoyed this book. There's some criticisms out there that I definitely agree with, but overall I still would recommend it. It is such a good book. Next, I have Written in the Stars by Alexandria Bellefleur. This is also a romance. It is a sapphic romance, and it is about these two very different people. There's kind of like the type A character that's very put together and organized, and then there is the kind of more chaotic character who works for a company that deals with astrology, and she's a little more out there. And their unexpected love story, and it is just so cute, very steamy. I love this whole series. There's 3 books in the series. The third one is also a sapphic romance, so like throw that one in there too. They're both so good. But the whole series is really good. The characters are funny. The romances are very believable, down to earth, and banter is hilarious. And I feel like banter is one of the most important things to me in a romance book. Like, I want it to be funny or cute or something along those lines, or like angry, like if it's like enemies to lovers. Like, I want to feel that tension and that happiness, and so it's very important to me that banter be good, and the banter in these books is so fun. It's so funny. So I definitely recommend this series as a whole. Next up, I have The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. This one is a little different than the other ones in this list. This one is not romantic. The fact that some of the characters are queer are not like the point of the story as in some of the other books on this list. There is a trans character, there are gay characters, but again, most of the time, those aspects of themselves are not like what the story is about. This is a fantasy story that's kind of like an apocalyptic story where these seasons come through that basically desolate the land, and the humanity that is able to survive must start again. And this happens every so often. And there are these people with the power to control the earth. But because people are so scared of them, they are very strictly controlled by the government. And they are only used by the government, and they cannot use their powers elsewhere. So we follow these 3 different women at different stages of their lives as they try to cope with having these powers and living in this world. And it is just such a well-crafted story. This book is probably one of the best books I've ever read. This series as a whole, I have in my top series of all time video, which I'll link above. It is incredible. I mean, every book has won a Hugo Award in this series, so like that alone should tell you how good it is, but it honestly is a masterpiece. And there's some people are put off by the beginning because for a while it's in second person perspective, and a lot of people just really don't enjoy that, but I promise it's worth it, and it totally makes sense as some of the big reveals happen throughout the story. So I definitely recommend this book. I think that it is fantastic, and I think the representation in it is very good. And so I definitely recommend this for Pride Month. Next, I have Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell. This is a romance sci-fi book. The sci-fi is very light. It's more romance based in space than it is like a heavy sci-fi book. I really enjoyed this book. I really had no idea what it was going into it. I thought it was a YA book because the cover kind of gave me some YA vibes, but it definitely reads more adult. And I just saw that it had a really pretty cover, so I read it, and I'd seen other people talking about it, so I went into it pretty blind, and it is a very cute story. It's about this kind of like, it's about these 2 people that are involved in politics, and one of them is the chaotic one, and has, now that I'm saying this out loud, it's kind of feeling like Red, White, and Royal Blue, but one of them has created this like PR nightmare, and the other one has just had a husband die, and so they are paired up to marry for political purposes, and so they get married without really knowing each other that well. And what slowly develops is a beautiful friendship and then relationship, and it's all very slow moving, but the way that these characters stick up for each other is really beautiful. It's definitely not a steamy book by any means, but now that I'm saying all of this out loud, I'm really wanting to reread it. But yeah, the book is like a very slow moving, touching romance that is just about these two men that are just trying to work through all of this stuff that's going on in their lives and kind of having to rely on each other even though they don't know each other that well, and just like the friendship that comes from that. There's also a lot of like them figuring out all of the things they assumed about the other that aren't necessarily true, which I really enjoyed. So I definitely recommend this book. I know Everina Maxwell just had another book announced, so I already have it pre-ordered. I'm like so excited for it because I absolutely loved this one. Next up, I have The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke. This is a fantasy book that has a sapphic romance at the head of it. This book is about a woman who was taken from her homeland and conscripted to fight in a war for their colonizing country. She's completely dedicated to this country. She has heard some of her fellow conscripts kind of like fomenting rebellion, and she is having none of it. She is 100% committed to this country. She believes they have bettered her. But then she is paired with Luca, who is kind of this like who is kind of part of like the nobility, who is trying to overthrow her uncle and run her own country, and it is all very political and all of that. The two main characters kind of give me like Gideon and Harrow vibes. The soldier is like the big burly soldier type, and then Luca, who's part of the nobility, is kind of the more frail one. And so they start having a budding romance, but they have a lot of tensions, what with all the politics going on and stuff. I really liked this book. I'm excited for the second one. I don't think it's been announced yet. If it has, I'm even more excited. But I really liked this book. I thought that the romance was believable. It was kind of slow, but I liked it a lot. I think that the politics were well thought out. I was definitely confused at a few points through it, but I think that's mostly because I was listening to the audiobook, and a lot of times when a book is very politics heavy, I have a hard time following it as an audiobook. So I'm hoping to reread this first one before the second one comes out so I can kind of have a fresh start in my head. But I really liked this book. It's a more new release. I think it came out last year. So I definitely recommend it if you haven't read it. It is adult fantasy. The romance is not like the main purpose of the story. Like there is a romance and it is part of the story, but it's not like this whole book is a romance novel. It is a fantasy novel with a romantic relationship. But I really liked it a lot, so I definitely recommend. Next up, I have Black Sun by Rebecca Rowanhorse. I've been talking about this book a little bit lately because Fevered Star just came out, the second one, and I've read it. More of my thoughts in my May wrap-up, which I will link above. But this book is the first one in the series, and I absolutely loved it. And there was a lot of representation in it. So this book is set in pre-Columbian Americas. So before colonization, a lot of those communities were a lot less strict about just gender and sexuality and stuff as Western civilization is, i.e. European civilization is. So that's really highlighted in this book. There are queer characters, there are trans characters, there's people with neo-pronouns, like it's all in there. You see so much representation in this book, which I think is so well done. And just kind of seeing how different it is culturally is really beautiful to see. Like none of it is really questioned at all. It's just like you are who you are, and I think that's really beautiful to see. I know it can sometimes be hard for people to read just more about queer struggles and just want to see queer people existing, and I think that this is a perfect example of that. It is just queer people existing. So I definitely recommend this book. The fantasy is great. All of the magic is so cool. The characters are incredible. I have said that the second book kind of has middle book syndrome, but I think where it has set up the third book, I think will make an incredible trilogy. I think it's a trilogy. But this first book is an absolute masterpiece, and I highly recommend it. Next up, I have The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson. I don't think I've talked about this on my channel before, probably because it wasn't like a top favorite of mine, but it is a very good book. It is a sci-fi book kind of about like alternate realities, and it's about these two women falling in love. That is kind of the side story, but it is still a really great part of the story. So basically, multi-dimensional travel is possible. However, there's a catch. You cannot travel to a world where your doppelganger is alive. So you can only go to places where your doppelganger has died. And so there's certain people whose doppelgangers have died on most other dimensions. And so they are tasked by the government, essentially, to go to these other dimensions and collect data. The main character, who has died on most other dimensions, is taken from the wastes and brought into a nice apartment, and she flirts constantly with her handler, and she has to keep going to all of these other dimensions. But then as she kind of figures out more about the role she's playing in this multi-dimensional travel, she kind of realizes the dangers of it and must kind of fight her way out of it. And the romance is really beautiful. It's not very long. It's a pretty quick read. I think I read it in one sitting. But I thought that the environment was really great. The atmosphere was so well written. The romance was funny and believable. And I think multidimensional travel is just a really cool concept. I liked the exploration of classism and things like that went on in the book. I felt like it was all done very believably, and was very relatable back to our current status as people living on this earth. I felt like there's a lot of classism, obviously, in this world. I live in America, and it's very prevalent here, especially right now with all of the tensions. So I think it's a very relatable book, even though it is set in the future and they're traveling between dimensions. And I just think that the characters are so great. The cover really illustrates the divide between the rich and the poor. You can kind of see it a little better on the back. There's this wealthy side with the sprawling metropolis, and then there's these barren wastes that are outside of the city. So I think it's just a really beautiful book. I absolutely love it. I might also reread this soon. This video is making me want to reread all these books. But this book is really good, and I highly recommend it if you like a sci-fi romance kind of thing. This one's definitely more sci-fi heavy than romance heavy, unlike Winter's Orbit, which I said was more romance, less sci-fi. This one's definitely heavy sci-fi with some romance. And last but not least, I have a book I've talked about quite a bit on this channel, and that is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This book is obviously everywhere. Everyone talks about it, so I'm probably not telling you anything new. I just don't want to pass up a chance to talk about it. This is a retelling of basically the Iliad, so we focus on Achilles and Patroclus and their love story. And it is just absolutely beautifully written. Madeline Miller also wrote Circe, and that is another retelling, and she's just so good at it. I absolutely love The Song of Achilles. It is just so well written. It's so beautiful. The romance is believable and slow and touching, and just makes you want to do anything you can to help these two men just live the best life possible. It broke me at the end. I was a crying mess on the floor. This book is everything. And I keep saying it, and I'm still committed to it. I'm going to reread it soon because I listened to it as an audiobook the first time, and the prose is just so well written that I really want to read a physical copy to kind of just absorb it even more. So highly recommend this. I won't talk about it too long because almost everyone has heard about this book and or read this book. So still I recommend it, especially if you just like mythology retellings. It's also just a really good retelling, but the romance element is just beautiful. Anyway, with that is my 10 recommendations for Pride this month. Get out there, educate yourself, donate to mutual aid funds, donate to your queer friends, give people the space they need, make them feel safe. We are here to help. I hope that you guys are able to find some really great books on this list because I think they're all really great. So I hope that you agree. I hope you're able to find something that you like. Support queer artists this month, support queer authors. Just read some good books. There's so many good books out there. Read them. Thank you guys for watching. That is all of the books. That is the end of this video. If you liked this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know other queer books you think I should check out. If I haven't read them, I will definitely add it to my TBR if it looks good. As you guys know, I especially love fantasy and romance, so highlight those. If you really like my content, please hit the notification bell to be notified every time I post a new video. Thank you guys for watching. As always, your support means the world to me, and until next time, thanks.